Alrighty, folks. Today on my show, one of the greatest guests I've ever had on my show. The lady's name is Ruta Lee, an actress for decades. And I'm telling you that if you don't know Ruta, you should know her because I think she's a superstar personally. Welcome to my show, Ruta.
I'm happy to be your personal superstar. Thank you very, very much, John. And hello to all of your viewers and listeners.
Well, I've just always wondered why I'm telling you, everybody knows you when they see you. You're almost like a character actor. You're like Robert Duvall, basically, for ladies. I mean, they know Robert Duvall, and I'm sure they know you, Ruta, but you never reached that superstar level. I mean, did you? I know that. What happened? I mean, with everything.
I don't know what happened. Ask the producers in town. But the only time I am above the title is in theater. In lots of theater all across the country, it'll be Ruta Lee in Molly Brown, Ruta Lee in Annie Get Your Gun, or Madam, Call Me Madam, or Madam in the Whorehouse, whatever. But the one thing that's really been wonderful for me is that the 60 or going on 70 years that I have spent in the business, I've made a living at it all these years. I've never been not working one way or another, either in television or on the movie screens or on the stage. Or, and I have to tell you an interesting secret about my life, the most lucrative time I ever had financially in my business was being a guest host on Home Shopping Network.
Okay.
5 years of selling a product, vitamin sprays, that was so eminently successful that I just have to say thank you, God, for the privilege. And I enjoyed my 5 years on Home Shopping Network. I went there for a week a month for about 5 years and really learned to love that part of Florida. Of course, it's a pretty place any way you look at it. I know you're in Mississippi somewhere, right?
Yes, Mississippi, Tupelo, Mississippi.
And but so it was great. But as I was saying, my name was above the title in most theater productions, whether it was Kansas City or St. Louis or whatever it may be. But I've never played New York. So that's still on my bucket list.
Oh, I think you still got a lot of time still, I mean, you're 39, just like Jack Benny, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm following Jack Benny's orders. He was a friend, and I must say that it was a great privilege to know Jack Benny. It was a great privilege to know George Burns, his best friend. And in fact, my first television show that I think I got paid for and that got me my union card, my Screen Actors Guild card, was the Burns and Allen show. And that was an amazing experience for me to work with these huge stars. You're probably too young, John, to remember the Burns and Allen show.
Oh my gosh, I don't remember originally, but I'm telling you, folks, again, Burns and Allen, classic. Everybody knows George Burns and you, his wife, Gracie. But through time, George, as we went on, I mean, when he came in his 80s and 90s, he even gained more popularity as time went on.
Yes, and he lived to be, what, 100 and something?
Something like about 100 years old.
At least 100, isn't that something? And he was full of piss and vinegar the whole time. He just never stopped. I just adored him. And he never lost his north. And I've always said, the Bible promises us 120 years. And I want every one of those years, but I want it with my brain still functioning.
Well, let me just tell you, I'm a big fan of television, and I mean, when I saw, wow, I had a chance to interview you, and here we are interviewing you. I mean, I remember you from the Lucy show, I remember you from Bonanza, Gunsmoke, and so on, Twilight Zone, one of the famous episodes of Twilight Zone, and everybody knows you, but it's one of those things, would you have rather gone through life by being a superstar, like a Betty Davis, or would you pick out life like you've done, go on with longevity, you've done 60, 70 years now, and stay, just to be known? Which would you have picked to start off?
Well, let's put it this way. I would love the respect that she earned and was accorded her, Betty Davis. I happen to be crazy about her. But I think I'm so happy with my life as it is because when you become a superstar, you can't move across a room without being accosted one way or another, you know?
Sure.
And I get enough of that as it is. And of course, I'm very, very grateful to all of the people who have cared enough to turn a television set on or go to a movie that I'm in or buy a
That's cool. Yeah.
theater ticket to come see me live on stage. And to them, I say the title of my book, as you know, is Consider Your Ass Kissed. And I really mean it and meant it for those wonderful people in my life that have been my fans and my friends for so many years.
We're talking with Ruta Lee, and once again, she's big time in Hollywood, but she's also big time with organizations such as the Thalians. Could you tell us a little about the Thalians, Ruta?
Oh, I'd be so happy to talk about the Thalians. My best girlfriend, Debbie Reynolds, and I were the mother superiors of an organization called the Thalians. And that's named for Thalia, who was a Greek goddess, a muse, and she was the goddess of comedy. And she also took care of straying lambs. And so, therefore, it seemed like a very appropriate thing for us as a group to be called the Thalians, because we are basically Hollywood for mental health. And we have been raising funds for mental health for some almost 70 years. And it's a wonderful organization that now is devoted to the care and welfare of our returning veterans. We started with the logo of going from pediatric through geriatric care, but now we're devoted to taking care of those beautiful young men and women who are willing to put their lives on the line for us in whatever hellhole we send them to in the world. And yet sometimes they come back and they fall through the cracks. And they need to be cared for. They need to have the best that America has to offer, because they were willing to die for us. And so we are doing something about that. We have joined UCLA and their Operation Mend. OpMend takes care of the broken and fractured bodies of these heroes, and we Thalians deal with the broken and fractured mind and spirit. And so if anybody is interested, and I hope everybody is, and you have 2 nickels to contribute, I mean, there are so many worthwhile charities, but I sort of feel like taking care of our military men and women is most important. Go to the Thalians, THALIANS.org, not com, but org, and you can read about us and you can donate to us. And when I stop and think that we Thalians have done some of the most spectacular shows in the world, we produce shows going from Frank Sinatra through Lucille Ball, through Whoopi Goldberg, through Sally Field, Dean Martin, gosh, it's just amazing. Gene Kelly. And every year we honored one of these marvelous people. And we continue to do that. Not our big shows anymore with 1,500 people coming, because we just can't afford to do them anymore. Hotel expenses have gotten so outrageous, drink expenses, all of that stuff. We do a smaller version now, but we'll go back to doing the big ones one of these days when I can find somebody to replace myself with, the way Debbie said, Ruta, you take over. And I did. And now I'm trying to find some fool that is hardy enough and has enough spirit and enough chutzpah, I think is the word, to go ahead and try and wrestle money out of people to support our cause. And it's very worthwhile. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
That's great to have an organization like that, and how you're helping a lot of people, especially, like I said, the military. You're helping the military out a lot, right? Yeah, yeah, and okay, so your career, I mean, definitely you started, your folks were from Lithuania, and you've been honored by many folks from Lithuania as what, I guess, the Hall of Fame there, or, and all of that, all that honor. I mean, tell us about your Lithuanian background, how your folks got here to the United States, and, you know, and how important, I saw a video online where you go back and you see your folks' place there, and and you put it on video, and you at the church and everything. It was such a heartache. It hits your heart so deeply to see you go back to see all that. Tell us a little about
Oh,
that.
thank you, John. Thank you. It was a beautiful experience. I've been to Lithuania quite a few times. The first time I went was after I had received a letter from my grandmother, who never learned to read or write. She never went to school, but a cousin of mine was writing for her. And she was dying. She was told by the doctors in Lithuania that she was dying. Now, mind you, this woman, my grandmother and my grandfather, were little farm people. They didn't have a pot to pee in. I mean, it was a very meager existence they had. Were deported to Siberia.
Wow.
And you say, why? Well, I think it's when they were trying to repatriate all of those smaller countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, with communists, with Russians, rather than the country people, the Lithuanians. And they were herded into cattle cars, the way we see the cattle cars that the Jews were deported into Auschwitz or different places. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather was with the gentleman herding the women to the center, trying to keep them warm on the train ride to Siberia, which took like 6 weeks.
Wow.
And his legs were frozen. And when he was taken off at a way station, when they took the boots off, the flesh came off with the boots. And he died there. And my grandmother didn't even know because she was still on the cattle car train that they were being deported on. And she spent 12 years in Siberia for no reason at all. How she existed is a long story that you can read about in my book. But the point is that she finally hitchhiked her way across Siberia to find other members of the family who had been deported, some of her daughters. And eventually they were permitted to go back to Lithuania if they chose. And they did go back to Lithuania. And this is where I had been sending packages. My mother, God bless her, insisted on us sending packages to sustain them in Siberia and in Lithuania as much as we could. You could only send 40 pounds, a pound of coffee, a pound of rice, a pound of salt, a pound of sugar. Whatever we could, we sent. And she was writing to say that she was now dying and thanking us for the packages. And I went out with friends that night. I found my mother in a spate of tears when I came home from Warner Brothers, where I was working at the time. And I went out with friends that night, and the more wine they poured, the more evident it became that I had to do something quite different. So I did. In a slightly drunken stupor that night when I got home, I figured out what time I should call, and at about midnight or 1 o'clock, I started placing calls to Nikita Khrushchev, the Kremlin, Moscow, USSR. And that telephone operator, the American one, I'll never forgive her, said, "How do you spell Khrushchev?" Well, hell, I didn't know how. Who the hell didn't know how? But anyway, I kept getting not available. But you know what I did, John? I made the call person to person. We don't have that anymore, but we used to. And any of your listeners who remember person to person know that you paid double for the call when you made it. But if you didn't get your party, you didn't have to pay for the call. And so I kept trying and trying and trying, and the operator would call back, "No, Mr. Khrushchev, no available. No speak Kremlin," this kind of thing. And in the meantime, I started calling the Russian embassy in Washington at about 6 in the morning, 9 o'clock that time. And I kept getting "Niet, niet, niet, niet" there too. And I talked to everybody from the window washer to the chief cook, but it was "Niet, niet, niet." Anyway, finally, the operator calls back. And by now I've sobered up and I'm getting a little testy. And she says, "Mr. Khrushchev, no speak it English. You speak it with interpreter Warsaw." And I said, "Yes." because I remembered he was a very attractive young man that traveled with Khrushchev. And when Khrushchev was banging his shoe and saying rather rude things, my father, who was fluent in Russian, would laugh and say, Khrushchev didn't say that. The interpreter made it better for our American ears. And so I spoke with him and he said, oh, Miss Lee, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. We know all about you here in the Soviet Union. We see your movies. And I was astounded. And he said, what can I do for you? And I explained what I wanted to do, that I wanted to come to Lithuania, where nobody was allowed to go from the outside unless you were a very high Communist Party official. And I wanted to go there. And what's more, I wanted to bring my mother and father, who had not been to Lithuania in 35 years since they left. He said, well, why don't you talk to your congressman about that? We'd love to have you travel. And I said, what in hell does my congressman have to do with my traveling in Lithuania? It's your country. This isn't a matter of politics. This is a matter of the heart. Well, I must have struck a chord in this lovely interpreter. And he said, call the Soviet embassy again in Washington in 30 minutes. And I thought, oh, hell, I'm going to get the runaround again. But this time when I called, John, I was immediately connected to the first secretary in the embassy, who happened to be Lithuanian. And I am fluent and fairly fluent in Lithuanian. And to cut a very long story just a little bit shorter, within 48 hours, I was on a plane, Pan American, with my mother and father, heading to Moscow and then doubling back to Lithuania, where we found my grandmother in, not in Vilnius, the big city, but in Kaunas, the next largest city. And cutting a very long story short, I was even given permission to bring my grandmother home to the United States. And I went back on my own the next time, all alone, to pick up my grandmother and bring her home. And that little lady, when I finally got her home to California, we didn't have jetways in those days. This was in the 60s. She walked down the stairs. She was what, 92, 95, who knows? And she dropped to her knees on the ground.
My goodness.
Kissed the ground and said, hello, America.
Very nice.
Thank God for the privilege of being here. And I often think about how sometimes we Americans are so spoiled, we forget how lucky we are. We forget how fortunate we are to be born in America or to be adopted by this wonderful country. And all I can do is say, we all have to smack each other in the head once in a while and say, wake up and be grateful that you're an American.
You've lived this is the American dream that you're living, and you lived.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's
absolutely.
very
I was
people.
born of Lithuanian parents in Montreal, Canada. They always wanted to come to the United States from Lithuania, but the quotas were closed because everybody knew that the streets were paved with gold in America.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's what my folks said when they thought they came to the United States.
Exactly, John. And so they did the next best thing and went to Canada. And I must say, Canada was very good to them. Of course, they had a work ethic that is very strong. You know, Poles, Lithuanians, Germans all have a very good work ethic. And hard work and saving their money made them prosper. They were able to buy some property. And you know, when we finally got the visa to come to the United States many years later, I mean, I was just a little girl, but here we came. And then for me to go into show business, I mean, my mother always thought that I was Lithuania's answer to Shirley Temple. She never knew anything about theater, which would have been a logical step from New York, but she did see movies. And she did see Shirley Temple, and she would say, my daughter can do that. And so there we are. So I'm very, very happily ensconced in California, and I thank my mother and father for that.
Well, so you made it through Hollywood, and you've reached the epitome of, stardom and everything like that. So you cross paths with such greats as Lucille Ball, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis. Wow, I mean, just those names alone right there speak of Hollywood. And do you have any stories from any of those folks that you?
Oh, well, I mean, I have a lot of stories, but needless to say, to me, Frank Sinatra stands out as one of the greatest, most loving and generous people I ever knew. I know sometimes what do we read about him? Never the good stuff, because he does all of that undercover. He is probably was the most generous man I ever knew. He took care of so many people, and the press never knew about it, but the press always knew every time he wanted to slug somebody. And I've got to tell you, he was one of the kindest people I never knew. And the only time he wanted to slug anybody is when I would have wanted to slug them. If he was sitting in a restaurant and had wound up pasta on his fork and was about to put it in his mouth, and somebody came along and went, "Hey, Frank, come take a picture with my girl," that would tick him off. Well, it would tick me off too. And that happened a lot because people forget that there's a certain amount of privacy that someone is expected to have if they're dining somewhere or having a sips with buddies. But I just found him to be the best. And he was, as you know, I told you I'm in Palm Springs today. And instead of sunny California, we're in a rainy California. But he was a neighbor practically of mine here, as was Lucille Ball. I shared many a cocktail with her in our community here in Palm Springs, as well as in Los Angeles. And I was at Lucy's, little Lucy's, Lucy Arnaz's wedding in Lucy's house, and spent time with Desi and everybody else. So needless to say, my life has been made so much better because I knew all these wonderful people. And of course, I did quite a few shows with Lucy. And my favorite one, of course, is the one where she opens the door and says, "Oh, it's Ruta Lee, the movie star," and shuts the door in my face and then opens it again. And I keep using that on all of my film trailers because I say, how much better can an opening be than to have Lucille Ball say, "It's Ruta Lee, the movie star"? But that's the kind of generous lady she was. And I asked her to be a recipient of ours for the Thalians, and she did. And I asked her to do something for the City of Hope for me. I was involved with the diabetic research department there, and she was the chair lady of an event for me. So she was a very generous and giving woman. And I'll share with everybody that Lucy was not at all what she appeared to be on the Lucy show, because she sort of played a slightly ditzy, kind of lost in space sort of person, and adorable and eager to get into trouble. Lucy was a very savvy businesswoman, and she knew which side of the bread the butter was on. And I will always love her. She loved the jewelry that I wear. I'm not wearing anything today. I liked big, no itsy bitsy jewelry, big, important stuff. And a lot of costume stuff. And she loved my jewelry, and she would borrow pieces from me, that if she was traveling somewhere, she needed to borrow. And I'd have to call her and say, "Hey, Lucy, can I borrow back what I loaned you? I need it for something or other." Needless to say, I've painted the picture. I think she was a charming and wonderful and a most beloved friend.
That is cool. I mean, I remember seeing that episode you talked about that had Milton Berle in it, and
yes,
that was the one where you guys were practicing a play, and Lucy misunderstands what's going on. And also remember you stepped in one time to take over for Lucy when she was, I saw that many years ago, and I remembered, I said, "Oh, that's, Ruta Lee putting two and two together," when you stepped in to be Mr. Mooney's secretary, trying to bump Lucy off.
That was
That's a hilarious episode.
There used to be, I don't know if they're still doing it, in New York.
Uh-huh.
I've forgotten the name of the city that Lucy is from. But they used to do a Jamestown. Thank you.
Okay.
My best friend Ronnie, whose house I'm at today, reminded me. There used to be a festival every year, and people came to that from Italy and
My
from
goodness.
Japan and from Hong Kong, and it was astounding every single year. And that's where Lucy is buried next to her mom. And they ran a lot of my television visits with Lucy there. It was great fun. I hope they're still doing it because Jamestown will never be the same after the Lucy episodes, and just the fact that she was born there.